With next week's G20 Heads of State Summit Trumpless, News24 Editor-in-Chief Adriaan Basson seizes the moment to call out those South Africans who've underlined the current US administration's bold-faced lies about the reality of life for whites in this country today.
It's just really shameful that one of the two most powerful people in the world can make these blatant lies and that he's not being repudiated by his local supporters. And I think for me, that's the worst. You know, Trump can and will say what he wants to say. But the South African enablers, the people who collaborate with him with this project, portraying South Africa as an absolute basket case where white Afrikaners are being slaughtered at foot, is just completely false. And they're not speaking up. They're not repudiating him. In fact, they're doubling down on this false narrative. And I just felt it had to be called out.
Later in our trending topic, a Free State man walks 15 kilometers to save his four-legged best friend named Option. Finally, we consider the Koornhof legacy with On This Day in South African History. That's at the end of the show.
New episodes of The Lead air Monday through Thursday at 7 p.m.
Did you see Ebrahim Rasool's declined the ANC's call to lead the Western Cape task team? Catch my hot take at the end of the show. Till then, my name's Graeme Robenheimer, this is The Lead, and this is the South African story. This episode of The Lead is brought to you by 10X Investments. 10X, your future. Moving to our top story today, remember the following names: Kallie Kriel, Rob Hersov, Elon Musk. These are just some of the collaborators News24 Editor-in-Chief Adriaan Basson argues played an integral part in backing US President Donald Trump's lies about the Afrikaner experience in modern South Africa today. Adriaan is with us in our Cape Town studios now. Janet.
Hello, Graeme. Good to be here.
Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah, the world is coming to South Africa. You know, I've seen the planes landing, and the G20 is kicking off next week in Joburg, and it's quite exciting.
What do you think about, before we move to your opinion piece, about the movements on the ground? Dara Marrero, the mayor of Johannesburg, he wasn't really in town. He was in Brazil abroad. Yeah. And you saw our colleague Alex Patrick's reporting about them trying to fix up potholes, but a lot of the senior leadership weren't even in town.
Yeah, no, I mean, the Joburg story is a whole other discussion. It does seem that there's been some lipstick put onto Joburg, but looking forward to some interesting guests, some interesting international dignitaries, and hopefully some good discussions about the world and where the world is at.
But Trump is not coming.
No, Trump is not coming, and that's really what got me thinking and writing this opinion piece was his reasons for not coming. I mean, we've known since February that he's got big issues with South Africa when he issued that executive order against us. But his latest post on Truth Social about why he's not coming just kind of, set me off again, because he was referring to, quote, the slaughtering of Afrikaners, and secondly, the confiscation of their land. And, you know, it is just really shameful that the most powerful, one of the two most powerful people in the world, can make these blatant lies, and that he's not being repudiated by his local supporters. And I think for me, that's the worst. You know, Trump can and will say what he wants to say. But the South African enablers, the people who collaborate with him with this project, portraying South Africa as an absolute basket case where white Afrikaners are being slaughtered at foot, is just completely false. And they're not speaking up. They're not repudiating him. In fact, they're doubling down on this false narrative. And I just felt it had to be called out.
Who are these collaborators in your mind, Adriaan? Kallie Kriel, the AfriForum CEO, is just one of them. Now, of course, you've seen the banner issues of the solidarity banners that were put up in Johannesburg and then pulled down again, claiming that South Africa is one of the most race-regulated countries in the world. And again, some of those claims are being, regurgitated again. Who are those collaborators other than the obvious Elon Musk?
I think it's important to look with some context of the past few years. So what's happened over the past few years is that AfriForum, and specifically their former member Aaron's Roots, and then the likes of Kallie Kriel, has been going to the United States, lobbying the Republican Party and specifically the MAGA movement to the cause of Afrikaners. Now, we know that AfriForum, at the heart of their cause, is portraying Afrikaners as a victim of this democracy, which is inherently false. I argue in my piece, and I mean, I can back this up with facts. I mean, we've spoken about this, we've reported on this, that Afrikaners have actually done exceptionally well since democracy, since the advent of democracy. Afrikaners are much richer today. They are much more entrepreneurial. They are in charge of some of the biggest companies in the country. They are still involved in civil society, in the arts, in sports, etc. So the Afrikaner cultural group, the white Afrikaner cultural group, if I can call it that, has benefited from democracy. And the unemployment rate after white South Africans is very small. It's around 7%. So compared to the country's unemployment rate of almost in the 30s and over the 40s if you take away people who's given up on looking for work. So there's really no factual basis for the case that white people are at the mercy of a majority black-led government. And that is, of course, what attracts Trump to the AfriForum Solidarity crowd, is that he firmly also believes that white people cannot flourish and cannot function in a diverse society, that white people need some kind of special protection. And that the immigrants flooding America would have ultimately done away with whites as the majority. And that project is what attracts, I think, Trump to the cause of solidarity at AfriForum. But it wasn't only them. It was also Gary Player, Trump's long golfing partner. We saw Gary Player turning 90 recently. He had a big function at Sun City, and he again spoke there of his love and adoration for Donald Trump and how he's setting the world straight, etc. Gary Player isn't stupid. He also spoke about his love of South Africa, but he doesn't call out Trump. He doesn't say, it's a pity that my friend has got this wrong because, you know, here I am playing golf with Afrikaners and other white people at Sun City having a great old ball. I'm not being murdered. My farm isn't being taken. And I must just at this point make it very clear that I'm not in denial about South Africa's massive crime problem. I mean, at News 24 on this show, we've spoken about it a lot. South Africa has a massive crime problem affecting all of us, affecting specifically poor black people who are dependent 100% on the police service, who cannot afford private security. So,
and we all want crime to be alleviated.
We all want crime to be alleviated, including farm crimes, attacks on farmers, attacks on farm workers, stock theft, etc.
Because they include black farmers.
Absolutely. So it is not a racial problem, and to racialize crime will get us absolutely nowhere. So I just want to make that point because it's important to say that, you know, it's one should never be insensitive to the victims of crime, including farmers, including farm workers, including everyone in South Africa who's been a victim of crime. And we have a massive crime problem. The SAPS is completely dysfunctional, as we can see every day now at the Madlanga Commission. But taking a particular racial narrative, portraying one group as more victims than others, is false. And that can only be part of a political project. That can only be part of portraying some kind of racial bias. That can only be part of portraying Afrikaners or white people at the mercy of this black majority government in South Africa.
Those collaborators?
Other collaborators, Rob Hersov, we've all, he's been on people's feeds. He's a son of a very wealthy family. He himself hasn't been a very successful businessman. There's not really anything he can show that he has done or built. His father and great-grandfather was, of course, the heads of Anglo-Vol, the very successful mining companies. But he has been an inheritor of that wealth, and he's seemingly spending his money these days on parties and podcasts in Cape Town, where he's become a bit of an outrage voice for a specific section of the population who wants to stand up every day and swear at the ANC. Now, I accept there is room for that kind of behavior in democracy. But, please stick to the facts, sir. Please stick to the facts. Please not just repeat Donald Trump's lies because he's shouting as loud as you are. It's this politics of outrage that we are in, where podcasters with caps come online and just shout at the camera, and that will get us nowhere. That's a race to the bottom. So, I think people like him and his this sycophantic kind of podcasters around him, part of something called the so-called Truth Report. They also repeat these lies by Donald Trump. And then, of course, you have someone like Andre Pienaar, the venture capitalist, South African born, who lives in the United States and London, who has been instrumental in opening the doors to the right-wingers in Washington, D.C., to the Trump crowd, who himself is sympathetic to Donald Trump's cause, who is a big supporter of Israel and the Israel lobby in Washington, D.C. He's also been an enabler of the Trump narrative in South Africa. And yes, Elon Musk and Sebastian Jooste. We mustn't forget about Sebastian Jooste.
Twatterboss,
the guy who was literally sitting at his guest house in Gordons Bay, probably sipping a glass of fine Sauvignon Blanc while tweeting how he's a farmer and he's being murdered and his land is being taken away, and actually fueling a lot of the hatred, online hatred and online false news on specifically the platform X, getting the attention of Elon Musk subscribing to his channel, passing these messages on to Donald Trump, who then shows them to Ramaphosa when Ramaphosa visited the White House. So there's a direct link between what some of these right-wing fake news purveyors have done in South Africa and what Trump's views are about South Africa.
And of course, Adriaan, all of these sentiments filter into one big giant potjie pot that then forms part of a broader echo chamber of, as you say, this outrage machine that constantly needs to be fed with these false narratives. And it just, forms the backrock of what a lot of these people, claim again on these podcasts, and they feel emboldened about their views. You make this interesting point within your latest opinion piece, which is entitled on the front page of News 24, "The Collaborators Who Betrayed Their Country for Trump," of course, penned by Adriaan Basson. There's two types of ANC critics when you look at the average Afrikaner in South Africa today. Who are those two types? And I'm going to play a devil's advocate and say that there's maybe perhaps two more types that I've met across my journey, but take us into that argument.
No, so I think this is a good point. So you've just referred to this outrage machine, the likes of Ronaldo Gous and Rob Hersov and Gareth Cliff. Of course, the ANC is making it very easy for them because of their poor performance.
Sure.
The ANC is absolutely poor government at this stage. They're still the largest party in the GNU. We know they've been losing support, so South Africans have been punishing the ANC for their poor governance of the country. But the ANC is still a very powerful factor, and if you see things like the Madlanga Commission, what's going on there, if you look at cadre deployment, the ANC is making it very easy for people to be outraged and to be angry. And there's legitimate reason to be angry at this country. I think what you and I are saying to each other is that they are feeding in a false other narrative, that white people are specifically targeted by the ANC, which I don't believe. I think poor black people are at the greatest mercy of the poor ANC government. So to the point of the critics of the ANC, of course, there's plenty of reason to be angry and to criticize the ANC. But I believe that the reason why the likes of Kallie Kriel and Dirk Herman and Flip Buys, the godfathers of the Solidarity AfriForum movement, if you look at their past, they didn't want apartheid to end. They were part of the Conservative Party that before 1994 advocated for the no vote in the 1992 referendum that said we should not continue to negotiate a constitutional dispensation with the ANC.
And people often forget about the referendum as being an integral part about the bringing of the end of apartheid.
And they got about over 30%, I think it was close to 35% of the vote was no, we shouldn't have a democracy. We shouldn't forget this. People didn't just disappear.
Yeah.
They stayed here. And in the case of AfriForum and Solidarity, managed very successfully to corporatize that conservative Afrikaner politics into something called AfriForum Pty, which is now a lucrative multi-billion rand empire that preys on the fear of white people, that they will ultimately be engulfed by the black majority and be chased into the sea. So I think we shouldn't forget that these conservative politics have changed. They've just now corporatized themselves, but they are still very much alive. They're here. And my argument is, and I firmly believe, that they've never bought into the idea of a majority government. I don't think they fundamentally believe in a
constitution
one person,
for all,
one vote. In South Africa, majority-led government. What they advocate is, in Dirk Herman's words, a community of communities. So they want special protection for Afrikaners. They believe that we should go back to the old homeland system, where each tribe or each culture had their own ground, their own place. Exactly. You remember Haie Verwoerd was famous for saying apartheid is merely a policy of good neighborliness. Now, this is what I understand Herman to say if he says we need to move to a community of communities. They don't believe we should be living together. They don't think white people should integrate, can successfully and happily flourish in a multicultural, multiracial community. And my argument is, guess what? The majority of Afrikaners are there. They are functioning, they are flourishing in a multicultural South Africa. They share office spaces, social spaces, homes, braais, schools, public spaces, social spaces with people of color. Happily so, comfortably so. And again, Afrikaners isn't this monolithic group that's represented by AfriForum that firmly believes they need special protection. And I believe, and if you look at just your own personal experiences, as well as research, that Afrikaners has, to a large extent, successfully integrated into a multicultural democracy. So. They are flourishing, but they are also critical about the government, and when government lapses, like the other South Africans. So for me, that's the one group of people who criticize the ANC-led GNU government, if you want to, is it's driven from a fundamental belief that negotiating this democratic majority rule constitution was wrong. The other group of South Africans, and I'm really, of course, I'm taking a big step back here, zooming out, but the other large group of critics about the government are people like you and I, and people who love this country, who are passionate about this country, believe this country should do much better than we are doing at the moment, and who hate corruption, who hate poor governance, who hate incompetence and cadre deployment and state capture, and who want to see change and actively contribute to change that benefits all of us in South Africa. And I don't think, I think we must be careful to distinguish between whether, if you criticize the government of the day, whether you do so out of a fundamental belief that black majority should not be in government, or whether you do so out of a love and passion for your country.
Right. I want to play devil's advocate and say, I want to add to your theory, if I may, Adriaan, is that it's a great theory, and I agree wholeheartedly. I read your piece, and there's a lot there that I, as a turning 36-year-old practicing journalist in this country that loves South Africa through and through, that I resonate with, and you really picked a lot of thoughts out of my mind and put it on a piece of paper that I can resonate with, and I mean that quite genuinely. But I'd like to add that I'd also think that there's also a group of Afrikaners who perhaps have one foot in the door of supporting AfriForum for what they do on the ground in terms of fixing potholes and cleaning up parks and stuff, but maybe don't agree with the idea of Oranje. So they're hesitant about that. I've met people like that. And perhaps there's another group of that, and I've met them abroad in the UK, who are Afrikaans people living in the UK trying to make a better going for greener pastures, but perhaps still want to have their cake and eat it and still come back to South Africa and have lavish holidays and still enjoy that sort of side of things.
Yeah.
So I think
let's talk
it's a bit more complex, right?
Yeah, so let's talk about the first group. I agree with you. I know people like that. In fact, I have family members who have contributed to some AfriForum campaigns when they were fixing potholes in a rural town in South Africa. So the way AfriForum works is they have these branches in towns. So, of course, in certain towns, they do things that benefits the entire community, and that should be applauded. And some of those projects is not only AfriForum, it is other community organizations as well from the local community. And I love it when local communities work together to improve their towns. That is great. For me, the issue has always been AfriForum's exclusionary membership and the way they are formed. They advocate for specifically white Afrikaners. The technicons, the schools they've opened, you have to speak Afrikaans to be able to go to those schools. So what they are building is not a project for the larger South Africa. They're building something for their own communities, which they are, by the way, allowed to do in a democracy. Sure. This constitutional democracy, which they didn't want in their previous incarnation as the Conservative Party, actually allows them to do what they're doing today. But I agree with you. There's the collapse of service delivery, specifically in rural South Africa, have made a lot of people desperate enough to contribute to causes like them. And just because you support a 50 Rand a month project to fix potholes doesn't mean you support Donald Trump's white supremacist project that the likes of Jaco Klein unsubscribe to. I will give that to you, and I agree with you. And I think it is out of sheer desperation that people look to organizations like AfriForum to fix things. It's a pity, again, that they are so exclusionary in their approach. the fourth group you refer to, yes. I mean, I have less experience of white South Africans living abroad, but I agree with you. I think I've heard so many examples of people returning recently.
Yes.
I heard of someone recently who packed up, who sold everything, moved to the Netherlands, and came back after a month.
Wow.
So, the grass isn't always greener. I think we've learned that over the past 30 years. We have a lot of problems in South Africa, but at least there's so much benefits. There's so much going for South Africa. We have an opinion piece this morning on News 24 from Adi Enthoven, the businessman, who says that South Africa has turned the corner, that in fact the trajectory is busy changing, that we have fixed Excom to a large extent. We no longer have load shedding.
What a breath of fresh air.
We're busy fixing rail and ports, and we need to fix crime next. And I think that is right. I think, one has to actually acknowledge those things and be part of those conversations.
Right. Where does this leave all of us, especially with Trump not coming to the G20? He doesn't see why South Africa should be part of the G20 story. And we might write off those comments to a certain extent, the geopolitical sort of policy issues of the day and where sort of South Africa finds itself within the BRICS narrative et al. But him not coming to see the true extent of what Johannesburg perhaps looks like, how that might not fuel a bigger push for the ANC to try and fix up their cities ahead of next year's elections. I'm spitballing, but what does it mean that Trump doesn't come?
Look, I think the world will continue with or without Trump, or without the United States. I think it's clear that Donald Trump is leaving the United States into a more isolationary period, that the United States is isolating itself from organizations, multilateral organizations like the UN, the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, and the G20. It's interesting. I think South Africa is very well placed to actually make interesting new alliances with other parts of the globe. There's going to be the likes of Canada, Mexico, Brazil, India, China will all be here, and we'll be seeing some interesting developments in that space. I think it's going to be interesting to see what the world looks like with America excluding and withdrawing from these arrangements. It's not ideal, and of course the tariffs that Trump has slapped on South Africa and the rest of the world, let's not forget that, isn't great. But I've also heard from friends in agriculture, for example, that they've already managed to find other places to send the fruit to and the wine. Unfortunately, not my house, but yes. But I mean, I think, South Africans are innovative. We are resilient. We will make plans. It's a pity that America will not be present. They are one of the largest economies in the world, and one of our largest trading partners. But we need to move on. We cannot get stuck on America. We cannot get stuck on Donald Trump. My call is really on South Africans who look at Donald Trump and what he says, to look at it with a critical eye, not to just merely because you feel so deeply frustrated with the misgovernance in our country, not to merely just accept what he portrays, what he says about our country. Let's stand up and fight for our country. Let's not just accept these platitudes, these false narratives. Yes, we have a crime problem, but there's no genocide or slaughtering of Afrikaners. Yes, there are things that are not going right in terms of land reform and of agriculture, and the way to fix it isn't by expropriating without compensation. And there might be constitutional issues with the current bill, but that's why we have a judicial system. The president has already said that the bill must be fixed in our courts through a court case initiated by the DA and others. So we have a democracy where there's checks and balances. Don't just accept these platitudes and these lies by the likes of Donald Trump. Think for yourself, read widely, and make up your own mind.
Lastly, I'll play devil's advocate one last time. You'll get a white Afrikaans person, or perhaps a Soti, come along and go, yes, but what about affirmative action? What about BBE? I'm not being able to get a particular post in a particular company, or I can't get into A, B, and C. Carol Payton and I have had quite robust discussions about where we sit at the moment. Parks Tower, the Trade and Industries Minister's next potential answer for a massive black transformation fund that could be the successor potentially for BBE as a required legislation. Where to next in that regard? What do you say to those people?
It's a long and complicated discussion that I don't want to rush in a few seconds. Suffice to say that when South Africa became a democracy in 1994, the economy was heavily skewed towards white people, and we had to find a way to transfer wealth into the hands of black people. We have successfully done so. We have a big black middle class today of over 4 million people, larger than the white middle class. That is success. Okay, so we can look back at the past 30 years and say something went right.
Yes.
But now what next? What does the next 30 years look like? Why do we still have rampant unemployment and poverty? So I'm all there to open those discussions on the future of BE. I think the DA has put an interesting proposal on the table to say, let's move from BE to PEE, where you focus on poor people, where the checkbox is actually poor and not black. So I think these discussions should be had. Again, it doesn't mean that Afrikaners are the victims of the society.
Yeah.
There was a reason why we had these policies. They were abused by the ANC to a large extent through tender corruption, etc. But let's have those debates about where we go from here, and that is happening.
Right. And that's Adriaan Basson. He's our News 24 editor-in-chief, leading from the front with the collaborators who betrayed their country for Trump. It makes for seminal reading this week as you take stock of where we find ourselves as a country and how we decide how we're going to handle a Trump-less G20. Adriaan, baie dankie. I so appreciate you coming on the lead.
Thank you, Graeme.
At 10x Investments, we don't only help you invest for retirement, we help you craft a legacy. With thoughtful planning and meticulous execution, you can create the retirement future you've always wanted. Invest with us today. 10x your future. 10x is a licensed FSB.
Trending topic.
Moving to our trending topic, and it's too much of a good news story to ignore. Free State man Sello Mabote was cleaning his yard when he suddenly heard shouts from a woman that his dog, named Option, escaped. Mabote's pet, though, was then hit by a passing car and injured. He demanded answers from the motorist, who had hurled insults and then drove off. And even when a patrolling police van stopped, officers refused to help Mabote. That's when he decided to make the 4-hour trek on foot to the nearest SPCA with an injured Option in his arms. That's 15 kilometers between Koornhof and Virginia. Mabote says he knew this was the only way to save Option's life. A kind passing motorist did offer Mabote a short lift, but for the rest of it, reports Tabiso Matlutsi, Mabote walked and he didn't rest for too long. Finally, the vet treated Option for a broken front leg. Mabote found Option as a puppy in a cemetery while visiting his parents' graves in 2023. Since then, the cute doggy has become part of the family permanently, and not just, as Mabote says, an option among many. Sure, can someone please get this man a bowels? What an outstanding human being. Got a voice note to share about this epic story? 072 562 3179.
Looking for a smarter weekend scroll? The Weekender is your ultimate guide to bold stories, sharp opinion, and a fresh lens on life in Mzansi. From exclusive interviews and powerful essays to wine picks, playlists, and pop culture gems, it's your perfect weekend read all in one place, landing every Saturday on News 24. And finally,
ending off today with On This Day in South African History, the 12th of November 2007. Dr. Piet Koornhof, one of the most controversial figures of South Africa's apartheid era, died on this day at the age of 82 in Stellenbosch following a stroke. Born in Leeudoringstad in 1925, Koornhof was a Rhodes Scholar and he earned his doctorate at Oxford, where he argued that black urbanization in South Africa was an inevitability. It was a view, though, considered radical amongst National Party hardliners of that era. He went on to serve as a senior cabinet minister under Prime Ministers John Vorster as well as P.W. Botha, holding key portfolios including sport, manpower and cooperation and development. Known for his eccentric manner, outspoken nature, Koornhof often clashed with colleagues over reform even as he remained part of the apartheid establishment. But after 1994, he expressed remorse for his role in the apartheid government and publicly apologized to those who suffered under it. In 2001, in a move that surprised many, he joined the ANC and later served as a member of parliament. His eldest son, Dr. Gerard Koornhof, followed in his footsteps, also joining the party in 2003. Before we end off today, did you see that report from Marvin Charles, ex-ambassador Ibrahim Rasool's now declined the ANC Western Cape leadership job? Now, this comes after the ANC had disbanded, completely dissolving the ANC Western Cape leadership structures. Of course, the party has not been able to bounce back effectively enough to pose any sort of real, credible threat to the Democratic Alliance since the DA took power in the province since 2009. Now, of course, Ibrahim Rasool had a dark cloud under him during his premiership in this province. Of course, you'll remember the brown envelope saga, in which his administration had bribed 2 Cape Argus journalists to write favourable stories about his administration. Despite that, Rasool went on to become the ambassador for South Africa to the United States. Look how that ended up. His views about the Trump administration landed himself in hot water. He was ousted from Washington, D.C., came back to somewhat of a hero's welcome. He still enjoys a fair supporter base within the ANC Western Cape structures in this province. Now, though, he's declined the senior role of overseeing the Western Cape ANC task team that's now going to be looking after the province. According to ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula, Rasool had indicated that he wanted to be excused from the task team. Apparently, according to Mbalula, Rasool has now got an important assignment in terms of global work, quote-unquote, that he could not resist. And when discussing with him, we felt that we need to release him because the work that he'll be focusing on now is going to demand a lot from him. Jeremiah Tainsma, a Mitchell's Plain activist, is a long-standing member of the ANC and apparently is now going to be leading up that position that Rasool cannot. Perhaps all of this is for the best. Maybe the ANC in the Western Cape needs to start with all new fresh members from the ground, try and save face, try and build up a party that is capable of being an effective opposition to the current DA-led Western Cape government. I don't know. It seems like recycling all those old faces is not going to do the party any good. In fact, what South Africans want to see is more young leaders in charge of the old bastions. Perhaps that's what the ANC needs here. Or does this signal the final dying days of the ANC? Perhaps the Western Cape is where that final entropy sets in. Hit like, follow and subscribe if you'd like to be notified of all of our upcoming editions of The Lead on Spotify, YouTube, all your various favourite streaming platforms. My name's Graeme and so long as there's trusted news first, we'll always have The Lead. This episode of The Lead was brought to you by 10x Investments. 10x your future.